Kelixar moved quickly through the shining halls of the royal palace of Earth, his footsteps silent on the smooth marble floors. He had spent years in this place, wearing the simple dark uniform of a servant. Though the humans around him barely noticed his existence, he knew every corner of this massive palace, every secret pathway, every whispered conversation that the nobles thought no one could hear. He was an alien, a Selvian, a species once proud, but now seen as weak and unimportant. Humans had risen as the most powerful force in the galaxy, and many alien races had accepted their rule, either through treaties or surrender. Kelixar's people had lost their last war with Earth a generation ago. Now, Selvians were scattered, working as merchants, workers, or, like him, servants to human rulers. But Kelixar did not complain. Life in the palace was better than life in the outer colonies. He had food, shelter, and safety. That was all a Selvian could hope for these days. Tonight was different, though. The palace was alive with celebration. Bright golden banners hung from the walls, and music filled the air. Important figures from across the galaxy had gathered for a grand event. The Queen's Banquet. Queen Amelia Valderia, ruler of Earth's vast empire, was hosting leaders, nobles, and warriors from many worlds. She was young for a ruler, only in her 30s, but her intelligence and strength had already made her a legend. Some said she was the reason Earth had grown so powerful, turning enemies into allies and crushing those who challenged her. Kelixar had never spoken to her. Why would he? He was just a servant. As he carried a tray of drinks through the crowded hall, he kept his head down, moving carefully between guests. Humans and aliens alike laughed, argued, and formed secret deals while pretending to be polite. Then it happened. His foot caught on something. He didn't know what. But suddenly, the tray tilted. The glasses of expensive human wine tipped over, spilling their deep red liquid onto the floor and onto the boots of a nobleman. The room went silent. Kelixar's heart pounded as he looked up at the furious face of Lord Adrian Voss, a high-ranking noble known for his cruelty toward aliens. The man's expensive uniform was now stained, and his cold blue eyes locked onto Kelixar with anger. "You worthless creature," Lord Voss spat. "Do you know what you've done?" Kelixar immediately dropped to his knees. "Forgive me, my lord," he said, his voice steady but low. He had learned long ago that speaking too much could make things worse. The noble sneered. "A Xelvian servant ruining my clothes. This is what happens when we let lesser species into our halls." He turned to the nearby guards. "Take this thing outside and teach it some discipline." Kelixar's body tensed. He had seen what human guards did to disobedient servants. He prepared himself for what was coming, until a new voice cut through the silence. "That won't be necessary." The voice was calm, commanding, and unmistakable. The Queen had spoken. Kelixar froze. The entire room shifted their attention to the grand table where Queen Amelia sat, watching the scene unfold with a curious expression. Lord Voss bowed quickly. "Your Majesty, this Selvian ruined the banquet's atmosphere. He should be punished." Queen Amelia did not answer right away. She stood from her seat, her long royal gown flowing as she stepped forward. Her eyes, sharp as a blade, studied Kelixar, not with anger, not with disgust, but with something else. Interest. Then she smiled. "I think we have more important matters to discuss than a spilled drink, Lord Voss," she said. "You may return to your seat." Lord Voss looked like he wanted to protest, but no one argued with the Queen. He gave Kelixar one last glare before walking away. Kelixar remained on the ground, unsure of what to do. He had expected punishment, not mercy. Then, to his surprise, Queen Amelia spoke to him. "Stand up." Kelixar hesitated, but he obeyed. He rose to his feet, standing taller than most humans in the room, though he kept his head slightly lowered. The Queen tilted her head slightly, her eyes still locked on him. "What is your name?" He swallowed. "Kelixar. Your Majesty. Her expression did not change, but something about her gaze made his skin prickle. Why was she paying attention to him? Why was she asking his name? Your Excelvian, she said, as if testing the word. Tell me, Calaxar, do you wish to remain a servant forever? His breath caught in his throat. That was not a question a human ruler would ask Excelvian. Most humans assumed Excelvians had no future beyond servitude. I do what is required of me, Your Majesty, he answered carefully. Queen Amelia's lips curved slightly, as if she had expected that response. Then she turned to the crowd. I have made my decision, she announced. People exchanged confused glances. Decision? What decision? The queen's eyes gleamed as she looked back at Calaxar. I choose Calaxar as my next royal consort. The hall erupted into chaos. Calaxar felt the air leave his lungs. What had she just said? Nobles shouted in protest, guards stiffened, and Lord Voss looked as if he would explode with rage. But none of that mattered. The queen had spoken, and Calaxar's life had just changed forever. Calaxar stood frozen in place, his heart pounding like war drums in his chest. Had he misheard? Had the queen truly declared him as her royal consort? The grand hall was filled with shocked whispers and murmurs. The nobles exchanged bewildered glances, some looking outraged, others amused, but no one dared to challenge Queen Amelia directly. Lord Adrian Voss, however, was not like the others. He stepped forward, his face red with barely controlled rage. Your Majesty, surely you jest, he said, his voice sharp. This creature is nothing more than a lowly servant. He has no noble blood, no standing, no. Queen Amelia lifted her hand slightly, and Lord Voss fell silent immediately. I do not jest, Lord Voss, she said, her tone calm but unyielding. Calaxar has served this palace for years. He has shown patience, discipline, and loyalty, qualities that matter far more than bloodlines. Calaxar's mind raced. Loyalty. He had only been surviving, doing his job quietly, avoiding trouble. He had never expected to be noticed by the queen herself, let alone be chosen for something so impossible. Lord Voss clenched his jaw. Your Majesty, I must object. Excelvian. You may object all you wish, Queen Amelia interrupted smoothly. But my decision is final. The silence in the room was absolute. Calaxar swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the queen. Was this some kind of test? A trick? What was she thinking? A royal guard stepped beside him. Come with us, he said. Calaxar hesitated. His life had been simple before this night. Obey orders, stay quiet, avoid attention. But now, all of that had changed. He had no choice but to follow. He was led through the grand palace, away from the hall where the nobles continued murmuring in disbelief. The guards guided him into a private chamber, a luxurious room filled with golden decorations and soft candlelight. The scent of exotic flowers filled the air. And standing at the center, still as composed as ever, was Queen Amelia. Calaxar lowered his head, unsure of what to say. Your Majesty, I do not understand. The queen stepped closer, her expression unreadable. You must be confused. Yes, he admitted. I am just a servant. Why choose me? Queen Amelia studied him for a moment before answering. You are not just a servant, Calaxar. You are a survivor. Her words struck something deep within him. She gestured toward a nearby chair. Sit. He obeyed, feeling out of place in such a fine room. Never in his life had he imagined sitting before a queen as an equal. I have spent years ruling this empire, Queen Amelia said, taking a seat across from him. I have seen nobles fight for power, warriors hunger for battle, and diplomats weave their lies. But you were different tonight. Calaxar frowned. I did nothing special. You remained calm, she said. When Lord Voss tried to humiliate you, you did not beg or argue. You accepted responsibility with grace. That is something few in this palace can do. Kelixar's hands clenched slightly. He had never considered it a virtue. It was simply survival. The queen's gaze softened slightly. Tell me, Kelixar, what do you think of humans? The question caught him off guard. He hesitated, knowing that one wrong word could mean his downfall. They are strong, he said carefully. They lead the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Queen Amelia smiled slightly. That is the political answer. I want your true thoughts. Kelixar exhaled. I think humans are unpredictable. Her eyes gleamed. How so? Kelixar considered his words carefully. They can be kind or cruel. They can be fair or greedy. They wage wars but also protect those they conquer. Unlike other species, humans do not follow a single pattern. It makes them impossible to understand. Queen Amelia let out a small chuckle. A fair assessment. Silence stretched between them for a moment before she spoke again. Tell me, Kelixar, what do you want? He blinked. He had never been asked that question before. Selvians did not have the luxury of wanting. I only wish to live, Your Majesty, he said honestly. She nodded, as if she had expected that answer. Then perhaps we can help each other. Kelixar frowned. Help each other. Queen Amelia leaned forward slightly, her piercing gaze locking onto his. This empire is strong, but it is filled with enemies, inside and out. I do not need another noble pretending to love me for power. I need someone I can trust. Kelixar's breath caught. Trust. In him. You think you can trust me? He asked. I do, she said simply. Because you have nothing to gain and nothing to lose. He fell silent, unsure of how to respond. Then the queen stood. Rest here tonight. We will speak again in the morning. Without another word, she turned and left, leaving Kelixar alone in the grand chamber. His mind swirled with confusion. He had entered this night as a servant. Now he was something else entirely. But why? And more importantly, what was the queen's true plan? Kelixar lay awake in the luxurious chamber, staring at the golden ceiling above him. The soft silk of the bed felt alien against his skin. He was used to sleeping on hard floors, waking before dawn, and serving without question. But now, everything had changed. The queen's words still echoed in his mind. I need someone I can trust. Why him? She could have chosen a noble, a warrior, or a diplomat. Instead, she had picked a lowly servant. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. He sat up quickly as a palace guard stepped inside. The queen requests your presence. Kelixar hesitated before nodding. I will come. His hands trembled slightly as he followed the guard through the silent corridors of the palace. This was no longer the path of a servant. Every step he took felt heavier, filled with the weight of the unknown. The doors to the royal council chamber swung open, revealing Queen Amelia seated at the head of a long table. Around her sat high-ranking officials, nobles, and military commanders. As soon as Kelixar entered, the room fell silent. He could feel the piercing stares of men and women who had spent their lives in power. To them, he was an outsider, an unwanted presence. Queen Amelia gestured for him to step forward. Come, Kelixar. He obeyed, standing beside her seat, feeling the tension in the air. One of the officials, an older man with sharp eyes, cleared his throat. Your Majesty, forgive me, but why is a servant present in this council? Queen Amelia remained calm. Because he is no longer a servant. Murmurs spread across the table. Lord Adrian Voss, the noble who had objected the night before, leaned forward, his voice sharp. Your Majesty, with all due respect, this is madness. A Selvian? In a human royal court, this is an insult to the traditions of our empire. Queen Amelia met his gaze. Are you questioning my authority, Lord Voss? Voss hesitated, but then forced a smile. Of course not, my queen. I only seek to understand your decision. The queen's expression remained unreadable. Kalexar is here because I trust him. Trust is something rare among those who seek power. Her words carried a hidden meaning, and the officials understood. Queen Emilia turned to Kalexar. I have decided that you will train under my personal advisors. You will learn politics, history, and the ways of the royal court. Kalexar stiffened. Your Majesty, I am not. You will learn, she interrupted, her voice firm, but not unkind. Because this is no longer just about you. It is about something greater. The weight of her words settled on him. He was not being given a choice. This was a path he had to take. Kalexar bowed his head. I understand. The queen nodded, satisfied. Good. Then let us begin. Days of training. The next few days were unlike anything Kalexar had ever experienced. He woke before dawn, not to scrub floors or polish armor, but to study ancient texts, learn human customs, and memorize the politics of the empire. He trained under the queen's best advisors, men who had spent decades shaping the future of the kingdom. And every day, he felt the cold stares of the nobles and officials who despised his presence. They did not see him as worthy. He was still a servant in their eyes, a nobody who did not belong. One afternoon, after a long session of history lessons, Kalexar stepped out into the palace gardens to clear his mind. That's when he saw her. Queen Emilia stood by the fountain, gazing at the water, deep in thought. Kalexar hesitated before speaking. Your Majesty. She turned to him with a small smile. How is your training? He exhaled. Difficult. She chuckled. It is meant to be. He studied her carefully. For the first time, he noticed the tiredness in her eyes. She was a ruler, but she was also human, a woman who carried the weight of an entire empire on her shoulders. Why did you choose me? Kalexar asked softly. Queen Emilia was silent for a moment before answering. Because I am tired of liars. I am tired of nobles who smile at me in court, but plot against me in secret. I needed someone different. Kalexar frowned. And you think I am different? I know you are, she said. You have no family in this court. No hidden ambitions. You are an outsider, and that is why you see the truth. Kalexar remained silent, letting her words sink in. People will try to break you, she continued. They will challenge you, insult you, and push you to fail. But you must not break. Her gaze met his, firm and unshaken. Because if you do, this empire may fall with you. Kalexar felt a chill run down his spine. He had thought this was only about himself. But now he understood. This was bigger than him. He clenched his fists. I will not break. Queen Emilia's lips curled into a small smile. Good. As she turned to leave, Kalexar looked at the grand palace around him. For the first time in his life, he realized he was no longer a servant. He was something more. And the battle for his place in this world had only just begun. Kalexar stood in the grand hall, his posture straight but his mind racing. It had been weeks since Queen Emilia announced her decision, yet the resistance from the nobles had not lessened. Instead, it had grown stronger, sharper, more dangerous. They did not speak their disapproval openly, but Kalexar could feel it in their cold stares, in the murmurs that stopped whenever he walked by. He was an outsider, a former servant, and no matter how much he learned, they refused to see him as one of them. But he was not alone. Queen Emilia had kept her word. She ensured that he received the best training, the finest tutors, and a place by her side in royal matters. She was testing him, preparing him for something greater. And he could not fail her. The first challenge. Today, however, was different. Today, he was to attend his first public court meeting, where nobles, merchants, and ambassadors gathered to present their concerns to the queen. As Kalexar entered the chamber, the room fell into an uneasy silence. The queen, seated on her throne, gestured for him to stand beside her. He obeyed, keeping his face neutral despite the weight of countless watchful eyes on him. The first petitioners stepped forward, merchants from a wealthy district, arguing about trade disputes. Kael-Xar listened closely as the queen resolved the issue with precise decisions. Then came a group of nobles. Lord Adrian Voss, the most vocal of Kael-Xar's critics, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we have a matter of great importance." The queen gestured for him to speak. Lord Voss's gaze flickered toward Kael-Xar before he continued. "It concerns your decision to place certain individuals in positions they are not suited for." Kael-Xar did not miss the mocking tone in his voice. Queen Emilia remained calm. "Are you questioning my judgment, Lord Voss?" "Never, my queen," Voss said smoothly. "But the nobles and the people of this empire deserve stability. We must know that those who stand beside you are truly capable." Kael-Xar clenched his fists. He knew what Voss was doing. This was a challenge, a way to humiliate him publicly. Queen Emilia's eyes flickered toward Kael-Xar. Then, to everyone's surprise, she spoke. "Very well. Kael-Xar, answer Lord Voss's concerns yourself." A murmur spread through the chamber. Kael-Xar inhaled slowly. This was his moment. He could not afford to falter. He turned to Lord Voss, meeting his gaze with steady confidence. "You question my worth, Lord Voss, but tell me, how do you define capability?" Lord Voss smirked. "Knowledge, experience, and birthright. Things you lack." Kael-Xar nodded. "Indeed, I was not born into nobility. I was not raised in luxury, but I have served in this palace for years. I have observed, I have listened, and I have learned." "Do you truly believe that wisdom comes only from privilege?" The nobles exchanged glances, sensing the tension in the air. Lord Voss scoffed. "Words mean little, former servant. A leader must make real decisions, ones that affect the fate of this kingdom." Kael-Xar did not flinch. "Then let me prove myself. Name a problem, any problem, and I will offer a solution." The room grew silent. Lord Voss narrowed his eyes, then smiled. A sharp, dangerous smile. "Very well. Bandits have been attacking trade routes in the northern region. Our forces have struggled to catch them. What would you do?" Kael-Xar thought for a moment before answering. "The problem is not their strength, but their knowledge of the terrain. The northern routes pass through dense forests and hidden valleys. Traditional patrols struggle there. I would station small scout teams, light and fast, using the same paths as the bandits. Not large armies, but skilled rangers who know the land as well as they do." Lord Voss's smile faltered slightly. The queen watched the exchange with interest. Kael-Xar continued. "Furthermore, I would cut off their supply lines. Bandits rely on stolen goods, but they also need food, weapons, and shelter. If we control access to these resources, we weaken them before battle even begins." A murmur spread through the chamber again, this time in approval. Even some nobles nodded at his reasoning. Lord Voss opened his mouth, then closed it. He had expected Kael-Xar to stumble, to fail. Instead, he had given a practical and intelligent solution. Queen Emilia smiled. "A wise answer." Kael-Xar bowed. "Thank you, Your Majesty." The aftermath. As the meeting ended, Queen Emilia pulled Kael-Xar aside. "You handled that well." He exhaled. "I had no choice." She chuckled. "No, you didn't, but you proved something important today. The court will still resist you, but now they see you differently." Kael-Xar hesitated. "Lord Voss will not stop." "No," the queen admitted, "but now he knows you are not weak." Kael-Xar looked around the grand palace, the place where he had once been a servant. And now, something more. He was not fully accepted yet. He still had a long way to go. But today, he had taken his first real step, and he would not stop until he earned his place. Kael-Xar stood in the queen's private chambers, the weight of the day's events still fresh in his mind. The court meeting had been a test, and though he had held his ground, He knew the battle was far from over. Lord Voss and his allies would not simply accept him. The queen sat by the grand window, looking out over the palace gardens, her expression thoughtful. "You handled yourself well today," she said, breaking the silence. Kalixar bowed. "I only did what was necessary." She turned to him with a small smile. "Humility is a good trait, but do not underestimate your own value." He appreciated her words, but he knew the truth. One victory did not mean the war was won. A secret meeting. Later that night, Kalixar received an unexpected summons. A letter, slipped under his door, carried only a short message. "Meet me in the Eastern Tower. Come alone." There was no name, but he recognized the seal. Lord Voss. A trap, perhaps, but ignoring it could be a mistake. With cautious steps, Kalixar made his way through the dimly lit corridors. The palace was mostly silent at this hour, and the flickering torches cast long, uncertain shadows. Reaching the tower, he found Lord Voss waiting. Dressed in dark robes, his face partially hidden in the low light. "You came," Voss said, his voice smooth but unreadable. "You left me little choice," Kalixar replied. "Why summon me in secret?" Lord Voss stepped closer. "You are smart, Kalixar. You understand that the nobles do not approve of you, but unlike others, I am willing to be practical." Kalixar narrowed his eyes. "Meaning?" "Meaning I have a proposition for you." Voss folded his arms behind his back, his posture as proud as ever. "The queen favors you now, but her trust is not eternal. She is a ruler, and rulers must always think of their kingdom first." Kalixar remained silent, waiting. Voss smirked. "Join me. Align yourself with the noble houses, and I can guarantee you a future here. We could make you powerful beyond imagination." Kalixar's stomach twisted. He knew what this was, an attempt to corrupt him, to turn him into a pawn for the nobles. "If I refuse?" he asked. Voss's expression darkened. "Then you will find yourself alone when the queen's favor fades." A warning, a threat, a test. Kalixar exhaled slowly, choosing his words carefully. "I serve the queen." Voss tilted his head. "And if she ever turns against you?" Kalixar did not flinch. "Then I will face that moment with honor." For a brief second, there was silence. Then Voss chuckled, shaking his head. "Foolish." Without another word, he turned and disappeared down the tower stairs, leaving Kalixar alone with his thoughts. A dangerous game. The next morning, Kalixar found Queen Emilia in the throne room, discussing reports with her advisors. When she saw him, she dismissed the others. "You look troubled," she observed. Kalixar hesitated before speaking. "Lord Voss approached me last night." The queen's expression hardened. "And he wants me to betray you, to side with the noble houses." She sighed. "I expected this. Voss is clever. He knows he cannot remove you easily, so he offers you power instead." Kalixar looked at her, his voice steady. "I refused." For a moment, Emilia said nothing. Then she smiled, a smile filled with pride and relief. "I never doubted you." Kalixar felt the warmth in his chest at her words, but he knew this was far from over. Voss would not stop. If anything, this rejection would only make him more dangerous. The queen seemed to share his thoughts. "We must be careful. The nobles are not your only enemies. There are those beyond this palace who would see us fall." Kalixar frowned. "Who?" She stepped closer. "There are rumors of factions within the empire who seek to challenge my rule. I do not know if Voss is working with them, but we cannot dismiss the possibility. A new threat, one even greater than the nobles." Kalixar straightened his shoulders. "What must we do?" Emilia studied him, her eyes filled with something unreadable. "You must prepare yourself. The real battle has not yet begun." He nodded, his resolve firm. He had come far, but now, the path ahead was even more dangerous, and he would not fail. Kale XR stood at the queen's side, his sharp eyes scanning the gathered nobles. The grand hall was filled with murmurs, whispers that carried hidden meanings. Lord Voss sat among them, his expression unreadable, but Kalixar knew. The noble had not forgotten their last conversation. The queen's voice echoed through the chamber. Recent events have shown that there are those who seek to divide this kingdom. I will not allow it. Some nobles nodded in agreement. Others, like Lord Voss, remained silent. Kalixar could sense the tension in the room. He knew that these people, no matter how polite they acted, were dangerous in their own way. They did not use swords or weapons. They used words, alliances, and secrets. The meeting continued, but Kalixar's focus shifted when he noticed something strange. A figure, a hooded servant, was moving too carefully, avoiding attention. Kalixar's instincts sharpened. Something was wrong. A deadly discovery. After the meeting ended, Kalixar followed the hooded servant through the dimly lit corridors of the palace. He kept his steps silent, watching as the figure slipped into a side room. He pressed himself against the wall, listening. The queen is too strong. We must act soon. A second voice responded. We cannot strike without support from the nobles. If we move too fast, we will fail. Kalixar's breath slowed. The conspiracy. He needed proof before acting, so he peered through the small gap in the door. Inside, two men stood in the flickering candlelight. One wore the robes of a palace scribe, the other a military officer. Traitors. Their words continued, but before Kalixar could hear more, the floorboard beneath his foot creaked. The voices stopped. Who's there? Kalixar had no choice. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The two men reacted quickly. The officer reached for his sword, but Kalixar was faster. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it hard until the weapon fell to the ground. The scribe tried to flee, but Kalixar knocked him back with a well-placed strike. You think you can plot against the queen? Kalixar's voice was cold. The officer gritted his teeth. It's too late. Others will take our place. Kalixar's grip tightened. We'll see about that. Warning the queen, Kalixar wasted no time. He dragged the captured traitors to the throne room, where the queen was in discussion with her royal guards. Amelia's eyes narrowed when she saw them. What is this? Kalixar pushed the scribe forward. They were plotting against you, my queen. I overheard them speaking of an attack. The queen rose from her seat, stepping closer. Is this true? The scribe trembled. Please, your majesty, I was only listening. It was him. He pointed at the officer. He planned everything. The officer spat on the ground. You think capturing us will change anything? We are not alone. The queen's gaze was like ice. Who else is involved? The officer laughed, shaking his head. I would rather die than betray my allies. The queen signaled to her guards. Take them to the dungeons. I want every detail extracted from them. The guards dragged the two traitors away, but Kalixar remained tense. The officer's words lingered in his mind. We are not alone. This was bigger than he had thought. An unexpected threat. As night fell, Kalixar patrolled the palace walls, his senses alert. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Then he saw it, a shadow moving near the queen's chambers. Without hesitation, he sprinted forward. By the time he reached the entrance, he found two guards on the ground, unconscious. The doors were slightly open. His heart pounded. The queen was in danger. Kalixar burst into the chamber, his instincts screaming. A masked assassin stood over the queen's bed, a dagger raised. Amelia was awake, backing away, her eyes filled with fury. The assassin lunged. Kalixar reacted. In one swift motion, he grabbed the assassin's arm and twisted it, forcing the dagger to drop. The attacker snarled, throwing a punch, but Kalixar dodged and struck back, sending the man crashing to the floor. The queen grabbed a nearby blade and held it to the fallen assassin's throat. Who sent you? The assassin's breathing was ragged. He said nothing. Kel-Exar stepped closer. Your plan has failed. Speak, and perhaps you will live. The assassin glared at them both before smirking. You have no idea what's coming. Before they could stop him, he bit down on something in his mouth. His body jerked, and within seconds, he was dead. The war begins. The queen exhaled sharply, lowering the blade. They were willing to die rather than reveal their master. Kel-Exar's jaw tightened, which means their leader is even more dangerous. A heavy silence filled the room. Finally, Emilia turned to Kel-Exar. We cannot wait any longer. The enemy is already inside our walls. Kel-Exar nodded. Then we strike first. She met his gaze, and for the first time, Kel-Exar saw something beyond duty in her eyes. Trust. Together, they would stand against whatever came next. And they would not fall. The palace was no longer safe. The failed assassination attempt had proven that the enemy was already inside their walls. Kel-Exar and Queen Emilia had no time to waste. They gathered their most trusted allies, commanders, advisors, and the few nobles they could rely on. The enemy was in the shadows, and they had to strike before it was too late. The queen stood tall, her voice steady. We do not wait for them to attack again. We take the fight to them. Kel-Exar nodded. We know Lord Voss and his allies are behind this. If we act quickly, we can cut off their plans before they grow stronger. The room was filled with determination. They had one night to prepare. The enemy revealed. As dawn approached, Kel-Exar and a team of elite guards moved through the silent halls of the palace. They had received secret intelligence. Voss and his conspirators were meeting in the old council chamber. Weapons drawn, they moved swiftly. When they burst through the doors, they found Lord Voss and 7 other nobles seated around a large table. Scrolls, maps, and letters lay before them, proof of their treachery. Voss looked up, his face turning pale. Kel-Exar stepped forward. It's over. But Voss did not surrender. Instead, he laughed. You think capturing us will stop this? He clapped his hands twice. From the shadows, dozens of armored soldiers appeared, weapons gleaming in the dim candlelight. It was an ambush. The fight for the throne. The battle erupted instantly. Kel-Exar deflected a sword strike and countered with a swift blow, knocking one of the traitors back. The queen's guards fought fiercely, but they were outnumbered. Lord Voss retreated, slipping through a side door. Kel-Exar saw him flee and chased after him. He followed Voss through twisting corridors, up a spiral staircase, and onto the highest tower of the palace. The wind howled as Voss turned to face him, sword in hand. You don't belong here, servant, Voss sneered. A man like you should know his place. Kel-Exar gripped his blade. My place is beside my queen, and your time is over. The duel. Voss attacked first, swinging his sword with precision and speed. Kel-Exar blocked and countered, forcing the noble back. Blades clashed, sparks flying in the cold morning air. Voss was skilled, but he fought for himself. Kel-Exar fought for something greater. With a final strike, Kel-Exar disarmed Voss, sending his sword clattering to the stone floor. Voss stumbled back, his eyes filled with fear. Wait. Kel-Exar didn't hesitate. He grabbed Voss and pushed him towards the guards, who had finally caught up. The rebellion ends today, Kel-Exar declared. Victory and a new future. With Voss and his allies captured, the queen's rule was secure. The traitors were stripped of their power and sent to the dungeons. The palace was safe once more. As the sun rose over the kingdom, Queen Emilia stood on the royal balcony, addressing her people. The enemies who sought to divide us have failed, she declared. With unity, strength, and loyalty, we move forward into a brighter future. The crowd cheered. Kel-Exar stood beside her, watching the people celebrate. Emilia turned to him, her expression soft. You saved me, Kel-Exar, not just as a warrior, but as my most trusted partner. Kelixar bowed his head. I will always stand by your side, my queen. And as the kingdom healed, one truth became clear. A simple servant had risen to become the most trusted guardian of the throne. And perhaps something more. The end.